I want to talk today about the death of George Floyd and the protests that we're seeing across the country. At this point, almost everyone has seen the video of George Floyd's life being taken unnecessarily by police, right? It's egregious. It's hard to watch. It's disgusting. George Floyd's life was snuffed out by an abuse of police force. And we're seeing the protests that we're seeing, of course, because not because of that one incident, but because this is just the latest in a long, long, long series of examples. And police violence against Black people is not new, right? If you look at the history of lynching in the United States, if you look at the history of race in the United States, right, what you realize is that there's a long history of struggling with the idea of equality, right? Equal treatment under the law is an ideal in American society. And to say that's an ideal means it's something we strive for that isn't ever fully realized, right? So it wasn't realized at the founding of this country, right? The idea that all men are created equal. Well, that term men, right, explicitly excluded women. Women were not allowed to vote. Black people were not allowed to vote, right? And of course, those things changed over time as the ideal of equality and equal treatment under the law was more fully realized. But we are still working to realize that, right? So we know, all right, so I'm a social scientist, and we know that racism is still a current problem, right? So there's just tons of empirical evidence that you can see it in that Black people are discriminated against in the banking community, in the educational community, in the law enforcement community. And so as a social scientist, we don't debate the existence of racism any more than climatologists debate the existence of global warming or biologists debate the existence of evolution. We do, of course, talk about how these things work, and we do debate the specifics. It's what we do as scientists. We seek to understand how things in the world work, right? So what has really changed in the last 10 years, right, as I think about the Black Lives Matter movement and what it represents is this, right? Police violence against African Americans is not new. Violence against African Americans by lots of groups is not new, right? Hate crimes. I do research on prejudice and hate crimes, and there's a lot of hate crimes targeting people who look Middle Eastern and look Muslim, people of Jewish ancestry, people who are gay or transgender, right? So we see hate crimes targeting specific groups, right? But this means that people can now quickly and easily document and put forward what is happening, right? And so the unrest you're seeing is a reaction to this, because you watch the death of George Floyd, and it's hard to see that as anything other than an abuse of power, an abuse of force. He didn't need to die, right? So I want to make clear, kind of as an educational community, as an intellectual community, we support certain ideals, right? One is the pursuit of truth. Veritas liberat is the Juniata motto, right? May the truth set you free. Okay, the pursuit of truth means recognizing our best understanding of the truth, right, which is that global warming is caused by human activity, that it's probably going to have a lot of bad consequences in terms of our food production, in terms of storms, in terms of coastal cities. And our best understanding of the truth is that racism is still a big systemic problem in the United States. And what we should be having is useful political discussion and debate about the best ways to wrestle with those problems. Right. This is how I think a successful society works, is to say, oh, there's a problem. We have clear empirical evidence of it. This is our best understanding of the truth. And now we're going to debate policy solutions, right? So how do we best tackle systemic racism? How do we best tackle climate change, right? And then you should have policy proposals coming from the political left and the political right, an honest debate, right? That is what I think we should all aspire towards. Denying the problem, especially the ones that are so well documented, doesn't help us move forward at all, right? And so when you deny the problem, when you deny that racism is a problem, when you take away kind of that acknowledgement, people feel that they have no choice but to demand to be heard, right? And this is no different than when women got the right to vote in the United States, right? They demanded the right to vote, and many men stood up with them, right, and demanded that right as well. And that's what we're seeing, right, with this, where they're demanding equality, equal treatment under the law. The statement "Black Lives Matter," right, is a statement of something that should be obvious, right? That shouldn't need to be said, right? So one of the pushbacks that you'll hear is, why isn't it all lives matter, right? And of course, all lives matter. Blue lives matter, right? But you fight for women's equality, for example, when they are unequal, right? You fight for women's right to vote, women's suffrage, when they don't have the right to vote. Right? You fight for Black lives mattering when they don't seem to matter. Okay, so Black Lives Matter never has been a statement of designed to put down a group, right? It is a statement that, again, should be a given, right? Shouldn't need to be said, which is why it is being said, right? Because when you see the death of George Floyd, it becomes clear that his life didn't matter in the way it should have. To the way it should have. Okay. So, as we look to what is happening around the country right now, I want to encourage you to try and understand those with whom you disagree. Okay, not to convince them that they're wrong, and that you're right, but to genuinely try and understand. It is hard, I think, for the idea of white privilege, right, is the idea really that you are blind to a lot of struggles, okay? When my teenage boys drive to Walmart, right, or go out anywhere, I don't worry that they're going to be pulled over by the police because they have a blinker out and shot. It's not part of my reality. It is if you are a parent of Black teenage boys. And I can't imagine growing up with that. So the protests are a sign that the social contract that we have as a society is being challenged. If every time my boys went out into the world, their lives were at risk from the people I pay taxes to. If the society I lived in was endangering my children on a regular basis, Why would I care about it? Why would I care if it burned down? None of this is to support or condone violence or looting, by the way. I want to make that clear because I don't. I believe very strongly in the principles that Martin Luther King espoused, the principles that Gandhi espoused. I believe that civil disobedience is necessary, is a duty to drag injustice into the light and to make our world a better place. I think it is very necessary for us to distinguish between the vast majority of peaceful protesters and those people who are agitators taking advantage of that situation, right? And some of them are essentially, unheard, have nothing to lose, and will loot as a result. Others are deliberately trying to create chaos in society. So when you have protests like this, even if the vast majority of people who are peaceful, which is what we're seeing, you're going to have people who are anarchists who are going to come out. You're going to have people who are white supremacists who are going to come out, who are going to do deliberate damage and try and sow chaos to achieve their political end, right? So terrorism, one common definition of terrorism, is to use violence to achieve a political end, right? By that definition, the state can be using terrorism if you are trying to achieve a political end and you have to use violence to do it. That is, by many common definitions, considered terrorism, right? The use of violence or the threat of violence to achieve a political end. I've seen happily many police officers marching with protesters, taking a knee. I know good law enforcement officers. We do not want to condemn all police as bad people in the same way that we do not want to condemn all protesters as looters and thugs, right? It's not true. There are bad actors in each. There are systemic problems of racism in our law enforcement across this country. The empirical evidence makes that incredibly clear. So I want to close in saying that as an intellectual community, right, Juniata strives to make everyone feel welcome, do our best to make everyone feel safe. And I say do our best because it's impossible to make everyone feel completely safe in any society, right? But what we've seen with police use of force against African American males in particular is unacceptable, right? And that's why we're seeing the protest. That's why people are saying Black Lives Matter. I can't breathe. And I think it is really important for us, for me, as a human, but also a scholar who does research in prejudice, to stand up and speak to that truth, to stand in solidarity with people who are being oppressed actively in our society, and to try and realize that ideal of equality under the law, right? Right. Anarchists essentially want to destroy the system. White supremacists want a system that is, rigged in favor of the color of your skin. And what most of us want is equality under the law, a system where we are all treated equally, where we don't have to fear for our lives because we might have a tail light out. So I hope everyone who's listening to this is staying safe, is being smart, is being caring, and is talking with people whom you disagree with about this issue. If we were on campus right now, there would be gatherings in the quad. We would be having a lot of public dialogue about this. And it's summer right now, so it's harder to do that, right? And we're all distributed. But I'm going to open up comments to this. So if you want to respond and talk about anything related to this, right? I'm happy to do so. Thank you.